few weeks ago, we read in our first reading about King David planning to build a temple in Jerusalem. David wanted to create a house for God next to his own, so that the two could be neighbors. At first, the prophet Nathan was on board with this idea, but then Nathan was visited by a dream in which God proclaimed that it is not David's place to build God a house. Rather, God would build the house of David and maintain a covenant between this house, this family, and God for eternity. Furthermore, it was foretold that it would be David's son who would build the temple. We have then read how David's son Solomon, his son by Bathsheba, was born to David in his old age, and how David had older sons, but they had betrayed God and David and had been killed, leaving young Solomon to inherit. And finally, we read last week how Solomon had been crowned king, and that rather than ask to be blessed with wealth or long life or the death of his enemies, all things that his father David had sought, Solomon instead asked to be blessed with wisdom. And God was so pleased with this request that God promised that not only would Solomon be granted true wisdom, but because it is wisdom, the true treasure of heaven, that Solomon sought, rather than earthly treasure, Solomon would nonetheless be blessed with earthly treasure. All of this leads up to today's reading from the first book of Kings. In it, we see that Solomon has commissioned the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. On the Feast of Booths, the feast when the people of Israel remember the time they spent wandering in the wilderness between Egypt and the Holy Land, and how God was present among them during this time in a very real and unique way, Solomon held the official dedication ceremony for the temple. The ark, together with the tent and all of the accoutrements that had accompanied it from the time the tablets were brought down from Mount Sinai, are brought into the temple. They are placed in the Holy of Holies. And from the few verses that are missing from our reading today, it appears that there may have been a slight miscalculation, because the Holy of Holies is cut off from the rest of the temple by a curtain. And rather than sitting comfortably inside, the poles that carry the ark are brushing up against the curtain so that people cannot see the ark itself, but they can see the outline of the ends of the poles in the curtain. Anyway, even though we are told that nothing combustible is brought in with the ark, as soon as it enters the Holy of Holies, the space becomes filled with smoke, and the priests have to temporarily flee outside. Now, in this moment, we have King Solomon bring forth a new, more refined theology of the significance of the temple. The temple and the smoke mean that the temple is a place where people can feel particularly close to God, a direct line to God, like one of those telephones we hear about on the president's desk to talk to foreign leaders to prevent World War III. The temple in Jerusalem has become the new Mount Sinai. It is the place to go in order to be closest to God, but it is not God's house. God cannot be contained within a single building. God is too big. And not only that, but the temple is to be opened to all. Even foreigners are invited to come to the temple to be close to God. God is God of all, not just the Israelite people. King Solomon, in other words, built the temple that King David could not. Not only because of the dream of Nathan that told David not to build a house for God, but because King David's understanding of God was too limited. God needed the wiser King Solomon, a man who could understand that God has a special relationship with the Israelite people and their descendants, and that a central temple was needed to create a common religion to bind those people together, but that God's love is for all of creation and cannot be limited to any one people, and that God is too big to be contained in any one place or time. God is, was, and always will be. And this is where we can learn from the wisdom of Solomon today. The first and then second temples were destroyed millennia ago. The people of Israel have been scattered throughout the world. But God is still with their descendants, and God is with us here and now. None of us have a monopoly on God. None of us know who God is entirely. God is far beyond any of us. God cannot be contained in any place, religion, language, culture, or time. Instead, we are called to worship God in what ways we know how, and to always be open to God speaking in our midst, even when the messengers God chooses are foreign to us. Amen.